The gospel lesson for this morning comes from John's Gospel, chapter 10, verses 1 through 15. Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. Almighty God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, who art our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Do you ever hear voices? Wait, I'm not asking if you should go seek professional help. What I mean to sort of ask and start to think about is, do you ever hear particular voices? If you stop and think about it, every voice is amazingly unique and rich in color and texture and tone, and every voice prompts a different reaction in you. One time, Helen and I were having a birthday dinner at the Italian restaurant in Epcot, and it was full of people from all over the world, and we heard different voices and different dialects, all kinds of things. But there were two young women who were at a table close enough to ours that we could hear their conversation. And Helen said to me not long into our meal, "Those two are from Alabama." And I said, "Really? How can you tell?" She said, "Just listen to their voices. I know Alabama." And I said, "Well, okay, I get it. They're from the South somewhere." And she said, "No, it's Alabama." And then after a while, Helen said, "I can even tell you what county they're from." Wait, no way. And I could tell she was focused on that all the rest of the evening, until on the way out we stopped by their table and Helen said, "Hi, y'all are from Alabama, aren't you? And from Montgomery County, right?" "Yes, how could you tell?" "I'm from Alabama too." Every voice is layered with all sorts of connections and relationships. I was thinking about that after listening to different preachers that we've had here at Park Lake for the past few Sundays. Walk Jones preached on the Sunday after Easter when his granddaughter was baptized. And as you all know, Walk has a wonderfully unique voice full of the Tennessee tones from growing up in Memphis, the kind of sounds that I imagine you might hear in a blues joint along the Mississippi Delta. And then on Easter Sunday, I sat at home and listened to the two Lindas, Linda Simmons and Linda J. Burke, same name, but very different voices. One's voice is very crisp and precise and thoughtfully measured, confident in the Middle American sensibilities from which she came. And the other voice is always on the verge of a deep laugh that just sort of opens you up to a probing question. Wouldn't it just be terrible if every speaker had the same voice? About 7 years ago, my brother Andy had thyroid surgery, and he had a very large thyroid tumor, which had also grown around his vocal cords, and the surgeon did everything that they could, but in the process of the surgery, he had to cut one of Andy's vocal cords, and as a result, it dramatically changed the sound of his voice. And after the surgery, his voice was weak and had a much higher pitch, and I know Andy was embarrassed about it because he would say he sounded a lot like Mickey Mouse. But Andy worked very hard and did lots of vocal therapy and built his voice back up significantly, but it was never the same again as it was before pre-surgery. When we gathered as a family recently to prepare for Andy's funeral, someone said, "Hey, here's a video on my phone before Andy's thyroid surgery. Listen, you can hear what his voice used to sound like." And it was very strange. I almost didn't recognize his pre-surgery voice. I had become so used to his voice over the past years that I had a hard time putting it together with the voice that I heard on the video, the voice that I was hearing in my head. Every voice has a different tone and texture and relates to us in some unique way, calls forth different reactions from us. Sometimes on our morning walks, Helen and I like to listen using a little app on our smartphone to the daily prayer services from the Church of England. And they have a prayer service for morning, afternoon, and evening, and you can listen to them. They're about 20 minutes long. And it really is quite engaging to hear the sound of that prayer service with that lovely English accent or other parts of the countries that they come from. And we'll be walking along, and there will be a woman's voice that says, "And now a reading from the prophet Isaiah." And Helen and I will look at each other and say, "Isaiah?" Not Isaiah, but Isaiah. And it's just wonderful to hear the tone and the texture of the scripture being read in that way. I'm sure that you know and hear certain voices. You can hear them in your head even when you're not in person. And the sound of those voices is like the ground under your feet. You walk firmly from one moment to the next as those voices make up the stable surface of your life. Listen in your mind for the voice of your mother, or the voice of your father, the voice of your child, or the voice of a lifelong friend. If you couldn't hear or recall those voices in your mind, you probably wouldn't be the same person in some way. And maybe I think one of our greatest fears is that there will come a moment when we can't hear or we can't recall the sound of those voices anymore. These voices which are so significant and important to us. We lost a wonderfully unique voice this past week. The musician and actor and activist Harry Belafonte Jr. died. He was 96 years old, and just mentioning his name brings his voice to my mind. That husky, Caribbean, textured tone. Remember the song that made him famous? Day-o, day-o, daylight come, and I want to go home. He became a star in the 1950s with this charisma that he had and good looks and the calypso music that he sang. But perhaps more impactful than his music and his acting career was that he lent his voice to the civil rights movement. He became a close friend of Martin Luther King Jr., and he was a significant funder both of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He financed freedom rides, and he supported voter registration drives. He would often get called, he said, in the middle of the night and be asked to send funds, wire money, so they could bail out Martin Luther King Jr. and other of his associates from jails after they had been arrested in the midst of their nonviolent protest. Harry Belafonte said in an interview, I got kind of tired of feeling like my voice was the voice of a whole people, and I really got tired of being called at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night to send some money to bail some cat out of jail down in Birmingham. But I knew it was important, and I was glad for my voice to be used for this important cause. When you hear Harry Belafonte's voice, it brings to mind not just his voice, but I think all kinds of important voices over the past 75 years that have been meaningful to us. Voices that have worked and marched and protested to make our nation more just, to make it a democracy, not just for some, but a democracy for all. You can hear the voice, can't you, in your head of Martin Luther King standing there on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and saying, I have a dream. You can hear that voice. You know that voice. There are voices that define whole eras and decades of history. People wrote about and made notes about the sound of Abraham Lincoln's voice because it seemed to be so inconsistent with his physical appearance, which was tall and sort of commanding, but his voice was high and nasally, and they made comments about it. It wasn't a voice that was pleasant to listen to. And yet many people say that that voice delivered perhaps one of the greatest speeches in American history, the Gettysburg Address. You can hear these voices, can't you, that define so much of who we are as individuals and even as a people. Go on and listen to the recording of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's voice at his first inauguration. Do you remember what he said? We have nothing to fear but fear itself. You can hear that voice on a recording, and it's engaging. There are voices from your childhood and voices from your youth that shaped who you are, that trained you up, that called out your voice. There are voices that you know just like you know the touch of your own skin. Is Jesus' voice such a voice? Can you hear it? Do you know it? Jesus says yes to those questions. He says yes in this passage we read from John. I think it's easy to get distracted in this passage and to kind of develop a sort of detachment. We get distracted by all the concrete details of the metaphors that Jesus is speaking in. He describes a shepherd and sheep and a sheepfold and thieves and bandits and a gate to the sheepfold. And John even says that those folks who were listening to Jesus, they didn't understand what he was saying, and they looked around and said, what's he talking about? Because they didn't understand the figures of speech. And I think we often try to solve our own confusion about some of these things by just simply analyzing the figures in the stories. But what if this morning, what if we tried to listen right now as though Jesus is speaking in his voice directly to us? The sheep will follow the shepherd because they know his voice. The sheep don't know the voice of strangers. The sheep don't follow thieves and bandits. The sheep know and follow the voice of the shepherd. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says, and you know my voice. You know Jesus' voice. That's a powerful and life-changing word of Jesus to you right now, this morning. You know my voice. Remember the story of the man born blind that Jesus healed? It happened in the passage right before this passage which we just read, where Jesus talks about the sheep and the shepherd. Remember, Jesus healed this blind man, and then all the religious leaders got up in arms about it because Jesus had healed him on the Sabbath, and they took the blind man and his parents and his neighbors, and they demanded to know who it was that had healed him and how did he do it. And then they demanded that the blind man denounce Jesus as a sinner, just like they were doing. And when the blind man wouldn't do what they wanted him to do you remember what they did? They drove him out. They drove him out. The religious leaders were supposed to be taking care of God's people like good shepherds would do, but instead they were driving people out of the fold, just like they did with the blind man. You won't say what we want you to say? Out you go. You can't tell us anything, they yelled at the blind man. You were born entirely in your sins. And they drove him out of the sheepfold. And when Jesus found the blind man, like a lost sheep who had been driven out, Jesus asked him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the blind man said, "Please tell me so that I can believe in him." And Jesus said, "It's me, the one speaking to you right now. The voice that you hear right now, it's me." And the blind man believed in him and worshiped him. The sheep know the shepherd's voice. It's the one speaking to you right now. And he believed him and worshiped him. There are other stories in the Bible where people get confused about the voice that they're hearing. One of my favorites is from the book of Genesis. You remember when Rebekah talked her younger son Jacob into tricking his father Isaac out of Esau's blessing? Isaac was old and Isaac couldn't see. So Jacob covered himself with woolly animal skins, just like Esau's hairy arms, and then he cooked up some beef stew, just like Esau would make, and then he went to his father Isaac to get Esau's blessing. And sure enough, when Jacob got close to Isaac, Isaac, who couldn't see, said, "It is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." Isaac touched Jacob, and he smelled him, and he ate some of that good stew, and he just ignored the voice that he was hearing, and he gave Jacob Esau's blessing. But Jesus said, "You know my voice. You know my voice." Well, one thing is for sure, we know lots of voices in the world today that demand that we follow them. We know the voice of what we sometimes call rights. I'll put that in quotation mark, rights. And this voice insists that we can act and believe and live in certain ways that no one can deny for us. And no matter what havoc or destruction or tragedy or suffering or death result from this, it is our exercise of these rights. Sometimes we even call them God-given rights. And in contrast to thieves and bandits, Jesus said, that come to kill and to destroy, he says, "I've come that they may have life and have it abundantly." Jesus did not say, "I've come so that you can be free to do whatever you'd like to do." He did not say, "I've come so that you can have your rights." A lot of voices say today, "It is my right." You fill in the blank. You fill in the blank. But I don't think that's Jesus' voice. We hear lots of voices of anger and bullying and intimidation and condemnation, just voices which seem to always be screaming. You know who else died this week? Jerry Springer died this week. Remember his voice? He was one of the first no-holds-barred talk show hosts that just sort of thrived on instigating everybody yelling and screaming and fighting on his show, even though in private apparently he was a very respectful, maybe even a gentle person. But his public voice the one that everyone knew, the one that many people followed, was just the opposite. I heard one commentator say that Jerry Springer's style may have been the precursor to the whole state of our current politics and civil discourse. His voice just simply set the stage for the way people seem to be interacting regularly, daily, now even years later. And so we hear a lot of voices, don't we, that say, you have to be afraid of each other. Be afraid. You have to be suspicious of each other. Watch out. You have to get what you want before others get what they want so that you can have everything you want and take care of yourself. Lots of voices. But I don't think those are the voice of Jesus. Are they? You know my voice, Jesus said. You know my voice. It's interesting, someone was commenting on the emergence of the incredible things that artificial intelligence can do. And some of you have been talking to me about the different ways we see chat box creating and writing things and producing things. Put in whatever you want to and it spits back out almost instantaneously countless words of what? Countless words of our own voices that it's just sort of accumulated from all the words and from all of our voices and just sort of mirrors it back to us. But is there a voice there? What voice do we hear? Is it Jesus' voice? Jesus said, you know my voice. We know there are lots of voices that aren't Jesus' voice. How open have we been to Jesus saying to us, you know my voice, follow me? Maybe we need a season, a time, a few Sundays when we can just sort of concentrate on trying to know Jesus' voice. Maybe we could call that season Eastertide. Maybe we could call that season a season of resurrection. But we're just trying to hear again Jesus' voice and just trying to trust again his voice saying to us, you know my voice, follow me. And if we had such a season and if we thought about it and we talked about it together at home and in our Sunday school classes and at church and maybe when we're walking with neighbors or maybe when we're praying, what would we start to hear? How would we start to know Jesus' voice? I kind of think we'd start to know it in words like the words we hear Jesus saying to us. Blessed are the peacemakers. Who do you say that I am? Do you believe? Lord, help my unbelief. Do you believe? You give them something to eat. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Woman, why are you weeping? What are you talking about as you're walking along the way? Peace be with you. Peace be with you. You know my voice. Jesus said, isn't this a good time to listen, to hear in our minds and in our hearts that voice we know is his voice speaking to us? Jesus said, my sheep know my voice and they follow me. It's not a question, it's a statement. The truth of Jesus' very own voice speaking to you. You know my voice. Follow me. Amen.